Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I think this too is recorded, so just so you know, I'm going to go ahead and get the slideshow started. So today we're coming together. It's been a while since we had a webinar. There's a lot of changes happening both at Common Cause Illinois, but also throughout the state and the country and the city. And we thought it'd be really good just to touch base with you guys, give you an overview, kind of like a 30,000 foot overview about, what's happening, and looking forward to the year ahead of more engagement, more interaction with you all. So I'm going to try not to speed talk because we got a lot to get through, and Jay's going to try to only share 5% of his knowledge because he has a lot. And when you see we're going to go through a lot today, we don't mean to be superficial. We just really wanted to touch base, say hello, get some feedback from you, and, kick off this, rest of the year. So what we're going to do, I'm going to give you just sort of a brief kind of overview of kind of where we are, sort of like in the landscape of things. And then Jay's going to be going over some of our legislative agenda and priorities, and what we're watching out for. And then we're going to have time for questions and answers. And we really do want to hear from you. So we'll have we're hoping to have at least 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes at the end for interaction. So please make sure, you write down questions that you want us to know. And then also Savon, who you met earlier, can answer questions in the meantime if we need to stop and answer something before we move on to the next topic. So to get started, it's a new world. One of the things Jay and I was talking about today was like in the last week or so, so much has happened, which has some real significance for our country, democracy, government, and all of that. We're not going to be able to go into depth about that today, but we thought it was worth just mentioning. And first, in quotations, unprecedented. We had the unprecedented arrest of a former president, unprecedented investigations going on. But locally, we also had an unprecedented, or very rare non-election of an incumbent mayor. So there's a lot happening in the landscape that we're keeping an eye on. And this just means change is happening, and we have to watch very closely how this is impacting the issues that we care most about. As you all know, Madigan, former House Speaker Madigan, there's a trial going on. It has quite a lot of implications, not just for holding people accountable, but for the operations in Springfield with the House. I'm just getting new to this. Jay knows a lot more about it, but when Madigan was there was really standard operating procedure. There was predictability in how bills move through. Right now, we're going through a bit of a sea change as the power structure sort of resettle. And it's been interesting. A lot of bills are going into omnibuses, which has implications about being able to get subject matter hearings when all the bills are clustered together. So, we're in a brave new world. We're looking at how we can be most effective in our advocacy in that new environment. We also have new maps, both across the state and in the city. This has a lot of implications. I mean, in many ways, these maps really are about codifying the incumbencies. It's a kind of gerrymandering we have here. But it also has meant, goodbye to some very familiar faces, with the congressional districts changing. You saw Marie Newman leaving and Adam Kinzinger seat going. But we also have a lot of new faces too. There's on the aldermanic level in Chicago, you've got a lot more progressives coming in. Same for the House. So we're keeping an eye on that. And then, with the census that was recently completed, and Jay led Common Cause's effort around the census, which has huge implications about how we view policy through the lens of, is there a black flight in Illinois? What's happening to businesses? Where are people moving? Are they leaving the city and going into new communities and suburbs? What's happening in rural downstate? And so we're going to actually probably be offering a webinar in the coming weeks that takes a deeper dive into the census, because there's a lot of talk about what the census is saying in Illinois, and we want to make sure that the headlines are telling the truth of the real implications of what this could mean. So stay tuned for that. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a new mayor in town. Well, what's today? That was 2 days ago. We have a new mayor-elect, Brandon Johnson. That could mean a sea change on a number of fronts. He's a truly progressive candidate with very deep ties to the unions, including the Chicago Teachers Union. It's going to be very interesting to see how working between the progressive agenda and the union agenda, what that means for the city of Chicago and what Brandon Johnson's administration is going to look like. We, of course, will be staying on top of that. And it is our intention to hopefully be able to get on some form of transition committee to be part of that conversation from the beginning. And then finally, you may or may not think about the Secretary of State unless you go get your driver's license and have to wait online a long time. But interesting things are happening with Lexi Janulius. Most states have the Secretary of State administer their elections. Here in Illinois, that's not true, but the Secretary of State is very important to voter registration since the passage of automatic voter registration that we have in Illinois. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes about our legislative priorities, but we should just note that Secretary Janulius and his team are very interested in expanding their role in elections and voter rights and registration. We're just getting started, but that could mean good things about moving further reforms and also administrative fixes forward as we try to be the best state in the country for voters' rights. We're going to jump into the legislative agenda in just a minute, but I just first wanted to briefly tell you about some of the changes here at Chicago, Common Cause, Illinois. So for the last year plus, our fearless leader, Jay Young, who you're about to hear from, has been holding the fort down on his own. He's been very busy being a fierce advocate throughout the state and in the city. And as I mentioned before, doing the census work. But we are hiring new staff. I'm the first one of that, doing policy and outreach. And we're going to be bringing in some interns over the summer to do outreach and policy engagement, as well as another organizer. So we're really excited that we're going to be able to sort of expand our work in the community and our engagement with our members between staffing, but also, of course, the pandemic. We're really looking forward to revitalizing our work in that area. That includes with coalitions and partners. We are in the beginning phases of planning and implementing outreach towards organizations that maybe not typically around the good government accountability table, but whose lives are impacted by it. So we're going to be doing more work on the community grassroots levels with partners such as community organizations and other kinds of maybe non-government advocacy groups, but other kinds of advocacy groups. We're doing voter protection. I think a couple of you on this Zoom today have been recent election protection volunteers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. As I've said, it's not the most glamorous job, but it's hugely important, and we so value our volunteers. One thing that we realize is that, we can't just knock on your door a few weeks before election. So we're going to be expanding our voter protection engagement programs so that we can come together throughout the year, getting educated about the issues and to be able to plan ahead so that our volunteer pool can be really robust, especially as we head towards the big election in 2024. So that's where Common Cause is right now, and I'm going to hand it over to Jay Young to tell you all the really good stuff.
So good afternoon, everybody. Again, I'm Jay Young. I'm the executive director here, and not only am I thrilled to have this opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you guys this afternoon, but I'm really looking forward to making this a recurring thing. It's a thing we used to do a lot more of in the past, and I'm really looking forward to. Uh, there's so much work ahead of us, and I'm just really excited about not just what we can do here with our staff, but what we all can do together. So to just give you a sense of where things have been in just this last few months, we've been very focused on some things in Springfield. As Mary said, we have a lot to be appreciative of in this state. Illinois really is a voting rights leader. We have a lot of the reforms that a lot of our counterparts around the country are fighting tooth and nail to get. And so we all really should be thankful that not only do we have a really robust set of organizations out there working on it, but that all of you who are on this call right now are sort of living testament to the fact that folks in Illinois care about this stuff, and we win on this stuff. But we also want to make sure that we don't just win things and forget about them, that we keep an eye on things. So one of the principal things that at Common Cause we've been focused on, particularly as Secretary Janulius was coming into play, was making sure that we understood what his plans for his office would be. And I know that he had run on championing not just some changes to the automatic voter registration system that, as you all will remember, we won, almost 8 years ago now. But we wanted to make sure that if he was going to make changes, that he was going to do them in ways that were going to protect some of our most vulnerable communities. We had to sue the state because they were not implementing the voter registration policies correctly, and we just want to make sure that we're protecting everyone. So that was certainly a large priority coming into this year. I would also put another victory that we had a couple of years ago around Illinois being I believe we were the 11th state to end the practice of prison gerrymandering in this state. That's the idea that we're going to take predominantly Black and brown bodies from communities like Chicago and transport them downstate to serve out the balance of a sentence, but make policy decisions, representation decisions, community investment decisions on the basis of where those folks are, even though we don't give them an opportunity to have a voice in that. That's frankly wrong. And I'm really proud to have been part of a campaign to fix that. Unfortunately, we learned that the state wasn't really prepared to live up to its obligations under the Safety Act and its prison gerrymandering requirements. So that is another thing that we're working on. We feel really confident. I was actually just on the phone today with Senator Peters, who's going to be carrying the bill in the Senate. We've already kind of gotten through the House and really looking forward to not just putting some teeth into this, but also getting a way to make sure that our communities are really being fairly represented. There's some other issues about transparency that certainly Mary, when she came on, took a strong role in helping to lead in the area of transparency of our courts. For those of you that are familiar with FOIA, or the Freedom of Information Act, you'll know that it is a fantastic tool for the citizenry to keep an eye on what our government agencies, our elected officials are doing in our name. In Illinois, as is the case in a very small number of states, we allow residents to use FOIA to get information about the executive branch and the legislative branch of government. But we shield the judicial branch from that transparency, that accountability. That's a problem because we don't need to necessarily know about, confidential court filings, but we probably care about, say, what's going on in our juvenile detention centers. We probably want to know if there are any Me Too incidents out there. We probably want to know what hiring practices look like. There's a lot that's really important, and that to date our communities are sort of without a good avenue to gain access to that. It's the sort of issue that can feel really deep in the weeds. And so one of the things that's been really important to us as we're thinking about a broader engagement strategy is really trying to add some real community voice to that effort, make sure that the folks who are being most impacted by this shield are really having a chance to have their voices heard and to make sure that our elected officials are hearing from their constituents and understanding that we need to change some things. We're also trying to mine the store on some potential threats to our election security. There is a push in some circles to vote over the internet. Over the last several years, it never would have occurred to me to buy my groceries online, but I do that. I ordered food for my kids last night. There's a lot of thinking that we do all this other stuff through the internet. We should be able to vote as well. I understand that, and I'm all for ways to expand access to the ballot. But we need to understand that we need to be able to do that in a safe and secure manner. And unfortunately, we don't have the technology there quite yet. If you think about it in the sense of if somebody were to say use your credit card to buy a pair of shoes on Amazon and send it to their house, there are a lot of potential things you could do. But we have insurance for that. We know that credit card fraud is a thing, it's real. We cannot allow for or permit voter fraud to be a thing in our state. And so this is one of those issues where it's important to see things from the perspective of this organization. I believe because I think that we are willing to be nuanced, willing to appreciate that sometimes what seems like a good idea might also have some downsides, but also be able to use and trade on the expertise of some of our folks and friends from around the country to leverage our relationships with the federal agencies that are helping to manage this, to really do that education. So internet voting, again, one of those things, not sexy in sort of the arguments that we're making, but incredibly important, particularly when we live in a state that actually not that long ago had been penetrated by foreign adversaries who were trying to get into our voting rolls. So there is that. I do want to sort of wrap up. These are the sort of things that I want to talk about all day. I want to talk to each and every one of you about the issues that you care most about. I want to talk about the change that we're all going to be able to make together. But I do want to sort of flag two things that I think, and it'll kind of lead into the next part of our presentation when we're talking about what we're looking for. There are two areas where I think change is in the works. Ranked choice voting is having a bit of a moment in our state right now with Evanston passing a ballot initiative last fall. I live in Oak Park. I know there's a strong campaign that's happening there and in some of the other suburbs. In Springfield, I think we'll be able to expect to see in the next month or so ranked choice voting in the presidential primary area. So I do think that there is not just things that are happening right now, I think are going to get across the finish line in Springfield, but there's been a lot of activity in some of the communities in the Chicago suburbs. And excuse me, I know Alderman Martin in the city of Chicago has also been trying to push not that, but also I think there are going to be some great opportunities to advance some campaign finance reforms in our state as well. We're currently working on a campaign in Evanston around that. And actually just, was it a month and a half ago, we were able to talk about some initial steps in the city of Chicago. In particular, I know that there's an interest now that we have elected school board. There are hearings right now. If you live in the city of Chicago, I hope you're paying attention to the elected school board hearings. But with the elected school board, with the police accountability things, there's a lot of push to run Miss Johnson from down the block and make sure that she can really express the values of our communities. But then we realize that elections cost money, and we need a way to make it possible for Miss Johnson to run. Again, I think we're seeing some things live that are happening right now, but I also think the future looks pretty bright for some issues that maybe just a couple of years ago I would have said we're going to have a difficult chance to get there. So legislatively, there's that. There's a lot of other things, great things I think that are happening in Springfield. We'll probably see pre-registration for 17 and 18-year-olds who are in school and being put on a pathway towards becoming a eligible voter. I think that'll happen. Some other things, again, could take a really long time, and I'm getting the wrap it up, Jay, glare from Mary. So let's move on to the sort of the what's on the horizon. What are the things we care about? What are we working towards? So there's a lot that we probably could talk about. I chose to focus on really two big buckets, and they all are related, but they relate to a idea that is a source of concern. It's a concern that I've been talking about for a lot. I talked with Mary about it when we were going just through the interview process. We live in an interesting place in this country, just geographically, where, again, I said we have a lot of these voting reforms, but we're surrounded by some states that have some pretty abhorrent practices, some real serious voter suppression issues. And I know when I talk to people who say everything feels like it's on fire all the time, and I know I want to help, put me in, coach, I can do something. There is a desire to, I don't know, get in the car, drive out to Milwaukee to do some election protection work, or I don't know, send a postcard into Maricopa County in Arizona and make sure we're defending things. And all of that work is good work, it's valid work, and God bless you for doing it. But what I want to tell you is that threat, those concerns that you're scrolling past on your phone and you're worried about, in other states, there are threats here too. We need you here in Illinois just as much as we need you and what you're doing there. And so I've kind of tried to focus just on some things, not to scare you, not to, there's a lot right now that I feel like we could be and should be thankful for, but I don't want us to get any less vigilant. So for example, Article 5, it's a thing that is probably the biggest threat to our democracy that nobody's talking about. And fortunately, again, we can be thankful we lived in Illinois because we're doing something about it. Article 5 refers to the article language in the U.S. Constitution that provides for an alternative way to to amend that Constitution by calling a constitutional convention. If you like crank your brains all the way back to elementary school, you might remember we've done one of those things once in our nation's history in Philadelphia. We went into that constitutional convention under one form of government. It was the Articles of Confederation then. We came out with a completely different system of government. That is the holy grail for all of those folks that want to, I don't know, get rid of marriage equality, who want to change right to work, who want to change, make it easier for corporations to leverage their money in our political system. It's the holy grail because there are no rules. You can change everything. The courts can't control it. And nobody realizes that right now, our country is only about 6 states away, 6 legislatures saying, yeah, we want to do that, from, what could be a dramatic change to this country. Now, this is an issue that's being advanced by folks on both the right and the left. Folks on the right wanted to change a lot of these sort of social issues. There's a whole group of folks on the left that see this as a way to end run the Supreme Court around Citizens United and some of those money and politics issues. It's a way to and those two groups, the far right, the far left, have actually come together to try to jointly strategize and get us across that finish line. Fortunately, in our state last year, we were able to lead a successful campaign to get Illinois to pull itself off the rolls. You got to get 3/4 of the states to agree. And Illinois was one of those states, which under this arcane theory that I don't want to go into right now, could have been one of those states that would have gotten the bad guys across the finish line. It is a thing that I would expect to continue to see. There was an Article 5 bill this session. We're going to keep seeing them. There is a lot of opportunity that is there, and particularly now that the House, the U.S. Congress, House of Representatives changed hands, this became really important. There were some folks on the right that had said that if they could only get Nancy Pelosi out of there, that this was going to be their HR 1. This was going to be the first thing that they were going to bring to the desk. It's a thing that we need to stay on top of. And God, I hope that if you have to send postcards, you're going to be sending postcards into those states. I think there are about 30 active Article 5 bills in states around the country right now, and I expect to see that in Illinois, and we're going to be there to stop them when that happens. These other 3 things on this slide are really sort of all interrelated. And it is this concern about the threats to our the professionals who are doing our election work. I'm sorry if you can hear loud noise in the background. For some reason, the heating in my building just kicked in. Before the election in last fall, I went deep down a rabbit hole of all of these groups that have names like the Three-Headed Eagle Alliance or Patriots for Peoria. All of them sound kind of like neo-Nazi groups to me, but there was a strong effort to recruit and train supposedly nonpartisan poll watchers who were going to be deployed across the state to gum up the works, to make things harder for voters. There were references to things like what they were calling Dropbox watch parties. I don't know if you saw, there was a national story, images of 2 guys with long guns dressed in camouflage posted up outside of a Dropbox. I want to say it was in Arizona. But with plans to videotape the voters and their faces, license plates, and to generally harass them as they were coming to use a perfectly legal vote by mail system and the drop boxes. There were strategies for deploying that sort of thing around our state. What we saw in response to that were our clerks being terrified. They were spending their money. What they should have been spending it on in the last elections was, more ways to make voting accessible, and they were spending that money on bulletproof glass, physical security, panic buttons that they could hand out to each of their employees. It made it harder for our election protection volunteers because our election workers didn't know who to trust. We have seen we've seen groups try to weaponize particular races. The school boards were one clear example. Those same networks that were pushing things like vaccination, anti-vaccination messaging, or election denying messaging. Those same pathways were also being used for some of this, not just the recruiting of these election disruptors, but also these school board races. Look, we're not an organization that is focused on the individual elections, but I care a hell of a lot about the ability for our nonpartisan, sorely underpaid election workers to be able to do their job and to be safe doing it. Thinking about this weaponization of FOIA, when the My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell, came here last fall, we showed up to his conference and he had pre-printed forms, FOIA forms, on the middle of each table, and he was training you to fill out a form. Each one of you fill out an individual form and start requesting all kinds of information from your elected officials. There was one clerk that we were trying to help last year who got really worried because she was being asked to disclose her key fob information. She was being asked to disclose her key login information that could be used to demonstrate when she's in her office, if she's in the office working by herself on the weekend. This stuff is scary, this stuff is real, and this stuff is happening in the Chicago suburbs, like right now. We need to be able to do something about that. So when I'm saying what we're watching, we're going to be doing, you're going to be seeing us. Mary talked a little bit about some of the ways that we're going to be changing the way that we're responding to things. We've spent a lot of time over the last several years, in part because of the pandemic, and we all had to work remotely. But we've been sitting a lot and working closely with our friends in the good government space to make things work better. And we're going to stay doing that. That's the work that needs to happen. But what we also need to do is that these things that I'm talking about, when I'm saying there are real threats that we need to remain vigilant on. I think we happen to live in one of the best states. The only thing I grew up in Jersey, so I'm always going to claim Jersey, but a strong number two in at least the posters on my wall are Illinois based. We should be fortunate, count ourselves fortunate that we live here. We have a lot to be proud of. It means we have a lot to defend. And we're going to try to do a much better job of working with y'all on this call right now, but also communities around the state to talk about ways in which we can all work better to defend and protect what we have. So obviously, I get up on a soapbox and I can talk. I'm going to try to shut up right now. And maybe let's figure out a way to start figuring out what you guys are worried about. What do you care about? What's exciting you? What's worrying you? What do you want to know about?
Awesome. Thank you, Jay, and thank you, Mary, for your incredible words today. Folks, just wanted to remind you all that you can use the Q&A feature or the chat in order to ask any questions, and we'll be taking the next 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes to go through those. So the first question that we have is, now that we've heard about everything that Common Cause Illinois is working on today, how can the folks at home get involved? Oh, Mary, I think you're
You're muted, Mary. I can hear you through the wall.
Sorry, guys, I don't know, I'm having some technical difficulties there. I was saying that's a great question about how to get involved. So thank you, whoever asked that. There's a number of ways, right? So as I mentioned before, we have election protection, and we just had 2 election protection programs, since February 28th, where we organized a field ground game in Illinois to send volunteers out to make sure that the elections are operating smoothly, fairly, freely, and that support is out there for voters who have any questions or are turned away, but also so that we have real live information on the ground to inform our advocacy and policy efforts moving forward with the Board of Election or whoever we need to make sure that the elections stay as open and fair as Jay says, the reasons we're thankful for. And we're going to be working to engage people around that. There's efforts around the country that do this, so we'll be starting to implement some of that. But there's a lot of other ways to get involved, and I kind of have it in sort of 3 buckets of share, tell, and voice. Sharing is like super important. That could be, an email from Common Cause about, the fight for FOIA, or about, election worker protection, or whatever it is. To share it with your network is huge. Same thing with webinars or events or volunteer opportunities. You all have your own networks, and that just sort of really amplifies our ability to make impact in the work that we do. And then, if you're part of an organization or a larger volunteer group, share us. I mean, we're happy to come and present when we can to a group and answer questions and get people involved, sort of move people on their ladder of understanding and engagement. It's also tell, right? So you need to tell stories about how some of the issues we're working on really, really matter and what they look like. I think sometimes, especially around sort of, good government work, where we're always talking about HB this and SB that for the bills, it's really important work, but it sort of leaves the face off of what's so important about our work. So I really encourage you all to share on social media, tag us, send me or Jay an email directly if you experience something that you think is important for people we want to hear real stories. This can get really technical. All you got to do is read a bill on the Illinois government site, and it sounds like all this legalistic language, right? But we want to tell the stories of real people. So you can help and get involved by telling. And then voice, that's like a big one. And voice vote, right? But also voice witness slip. Many of you have probably already done it, but sometimes we're working on a bill and we want to, really show the committee, the legislators, that we have people power behind us. And you can do that through a number of ways. One is a witness slip. When we get to the nitty-gritty of some of our campaigns, we'll be reaching out to you for that. Or if you're really passionate about a certain issue, you can write testimony that can be heard on some of the issues that we're working. Sometimes it's oral, but it's really easy from home to do a written testimony. And I'll send out some information about that after today's webinar. And that's the same thing with letter writing campaigns that we may be reaching out to you for to pressure certain representatives or senators about a certain bill. And then finally, letters to the editors. And if you get one in, please let us know. We'd like to share that with the rest of the community. So I think I gave a lot of ways that you guys can get involved. So I'll be watching for you. Thank you.
Sure, and I'll just sort of pile on to a little bit of that, and with that plug, that when we're talking about the voices of folks who aren't broken in the way that my brain is particularly broken, somebody who is telling the story of why an issue like this matters on my block. So I mentioned before, for example, that the city of Chicago, which is moving towards a elected school board, is having hearings. They had the first one last night. There's another one that's happening today. It's honestly a really big deal. You might get angry and worked up about Donald Trump getting arrested for paying hush money to somebody, but the thing that really matters is on a day-to-day basis is what's happening with your kid and his teachers, and are they going to have the resources and the education that they need to sort of engage. And you talk about all politics are local. That's a great place to start. And so it's not just about showing up to this webinar. It's not just about writing that postcard. It's not just about showing up to an election protection program. Sometimes it's figuring out a way to let folks know that these hearings are happening, because I bet most of the city of Chicago doesn't understand that those hearings are happening right now. So one, it's part of it is making sure that you stay engaged, and not engaged in the sense that you've got your phone in front of it and you're just shaking your fist, yelling at it. Engaged means the act of doing. So it is that sharing of yourself, sharing of your time. So there's that. I also want to stress that the voice of a constituent is so much more powerful than the voice of a paid advocate on something. If I show up to talk to President Don Harmon the next day, and I'm, there is Jay Young, Common Cause. I mean, he might care what I want to say, but he's really going to care about. I keep using Miss Johnson. Miss Johnson gets around. Miss Johnson, she, the constituent in a community who's saying, "This is why this matters. I put you in this office to do this job. Do this job for me." So your voice is powerful. I also think you have time to engage on some things that you may not be thinking about. So, for example, one of the things Common Cause does nationally is a social media monitoring program where we train folks on a weekly basis. You can pick up the training to learn how to spot disinformation and misinformation online. We also train you on, once you learn those things, to help work with the process of taking that bad info down, taking down the information that's doxing that clerk, and putting their home address out, or pictures of their kids online. We've got volunteers all over the country that are picking up a shift, after dinner one night, or on a rainy Saturday morning, and just doing that work as well. There's stuff that you can do. We talk about getting the voice out, lifting it up around our campaigns, and we think we're working on really important stuff. But again, I think it matters more that you are finding your story, and how those issues connect to you. And we're going to, as I said, try to be doing more of these things, so you can have more ways to think about as you move up your personal ladder of civic engagement. What are the things about your community, your neighborhood, that you want to make sure that not just your representatives in elected government are thinking about, but the members of your community, the members of your church, the members of your PTA are also thinking about and coming together to advocate for yourselves around. So hopefully that was there. that felt like a little rambly. So maybe move to the next question, Stefan.
No, that was perfect. Thanks, Jay. Our next question was from a attendee who says they have a family member who is a cybersecurity expert and professor, and they just wanted to know who they should put them in contact with to advocate for election security with regards to the push for internet voting.
JYOUNG at commoncause.org. I will put, I don't remember if it was on the slides, but if not, we'll make sure that all of you leave here with not just contact information for Mary and myself in terms of email address, but I'm super easy to find, including my cell phone number, which is probably a dumb thing to do, but I want to hear from you. And that's exactly the sort of thing that is great to help make our case. So I appreciate that offer of that resource.
Awesome. And I just dropped both Jay and Mary's emails in the chat for folks who may need them. Our next question is, does Common Cause Illinois feel any shift away from any particular radical anti-democratic forces? And they used the
Can you say that again?
Yeah, totally. Have we seen any or believe that there has been a shift away from radical anti-democratic forces? And in particular, they are referencing the results of the Wisconsin Supreme Court election.
I think that's a good question. I want to say yes. I want to say that there is that things are changing. I would say that there was Elon Musk hasn't completely run Twitter into the ground just yet. There's so many different ways that I think we are being educated about issues right now, that some of those forces that were working in the shadows to sort of push some of those anti-democratic messages are finding themselves being blunted by an educated populace. Like, folks know stuff, and if you know something, you can act upon it. So on the one hand, I think there's more information that is out there, and I'd like to think because we saw, I don't know how well reported this was last year, but there were a lot of national organizations like Common Cause and other the pro-democracy organizations that were really scared about the post-Trump wave, about the host of election deniers that were trying to run for offices around the country to wrest control of election offices. Certainly there are things like, what we're seeing in Florida or Georgia with, election law enforcement agencies being created and just making it very, very easy to take someone's vote away. But we didn't see those election deniers lost by a very, very, very healthy margin at the national level. I'm not saying we won everywhere, but we were able to defeat a lot of those folks. So in some ways, I think there has been a movement away, and we have tangible evidence that some of those folks didn't get into office. But in a lot of ways, we're playing catch up. The effort to subvert our democracy, to sort of the effort that anticipated the way in which we as a country were going to realign ourselves, where we lived, how we vote, and what that electoral map would look like. They've been coordinated, they've been organized for decades and planning for this. They moved to focus on state house races. And so you see carbon copied bills in Montana and in Ohio and in Missouri and in Texas that's all say the same thing. They're written in exactly the same language, pulled from the same bill library, and run with sort of focus grouped tested language. So we are seeing a lot of good things with both education and, again, some electoral victories. But we need to understand that we can't just hang our hats and say we're done. We did it, yay, because they're still coming. They're just coming in a different direction. So we just have to remain vigilant.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. Our next question is, how, if at all, is Common Cause Illinois engaged in Second Amendment issues or issues of gun violence?
So, it's sort of interesting. So, I'm not, there were many things that happened on election day that I don't know that I thought would happen when I woke up. One of the things that I didn't expect to see was a alert coming out that in Highland Park, of all places, where we just had had to deal with images of tricycles left along a 4th of July parade route after yet another mass shooting. On election day, a handful of kids brought a gun to school, and then they shut down a bunch of polling places. This is a constant element in our lives. And so in a lot of ways, we're all impacted by it. That being said, this is probably not, I would not consider Common Cause as being a frontline organization directly responding to Second Amendment issues. I'm saying that while looking into the Zoom eyes of Mary, who spent the last 5 years of her life working on gun violence issues and engaging communities where with the folks who were most directly impacted by this. So what I'm saying to you is, we're not a gun violence organization. We're not a Second Amendment organization, but we're human. And we live in a society that where some bad things happen.
Thank you. Our next question, to phrase this one a little bit differently. Are there particular concerns that either of you have from a democracy standpoint for any particular section of the state, whether it be Central Illinois or the lower states?
So I have thoughts about this. Obviously, Mary, jump in. I am always worried about, we're very, we're hyper segregated, as everybody on this call knows. We're hyper segregated in the state, not just across racial lines or class lines, just geographically. More people live in and around the city of Chicago and in the collar counties. And what that means is that there are more of the nonprofits, more of the services, more organizers. There's private philanthropy is sending more money to the communities where the people are. And it means there's so much that happens in and around the city of Chicago that distracts public attention from places like Danville, places like Cahokia, places like Peoria, places like Decatur, Metropolis. There are, I'm worried about our reach. I'm worried about messaging, and I'm not just talking Common Cause here. I'm saying this is a concern that I generally have with the nonprofit sector. We need to do a better job of reaching those folks. Because I know my last gig, I used to do a lot of driving around the state, and I can tell you, Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal, everybody hated Chicago and thought Chicago got more than their fair share. Factually not true, but everybody felt that way because that's what's on all the newspapers. We talked about on this webinar things that are happening in the quote unquote city. And I'm not sure all of you live in the quote unquote city. I don't even live there. So I do think that we need to do a better job of, again, getting those stories and educating and connecting and supporting folks around the state. Stop calling them downstate.
Just to sort of tag on what Jay said, a couple of specifics, and he may have mentioned this earlier, you know, there's been, you know, some recent efforts about getting these local elections. Again, like there was a big momentous day on Tuesday when our former president was arraigned. But the biggest threats right now are on the real local level across the state. And so in Niles, like there was an unopposed library board and some election deniers got in there, people who want to ban books. A wake has come to Illinois in some of these smaller school districts where they can infiltrate and try to recreate some of the bans that have happened in other states. So, you know, Jay talking about the whole state is, yeah, it's the whole state. And it's also each community probably is facing its own challenges. And I think looking at those local elections, hyper-local elections is probably a really important thing to keep an eye on if you live in those communities where they exist, because I think that people can come in the back door to get in, kind of like the Lyndon LaRouche candidates of the past, where they just put this sort of generic name up there and nobody was paying attention and they could get somebody they didn't mean to elect in. So I just wanted to throw that out there since it's happening in real time right now. Where did our wonderful question asker go? Say, Vaughn.
I am right here. Thank you all. Thank you both for answering those lovely questions, and thank you to our participants for asking those questions. We know that we are at about time, so in the interest of that, we are going to end the Q&A here. But if you have a question that you still want to ask Mary and Jay, feel free to reach out to them. Jay's at the letter J Young at commoncause.org, and Mary's at Stonor, STONOR at commoncause.org. Again, thank you all for attending. We really appreciate you all being here and being in the fight to push forward for a good government agenda. And we can't wait to talk to you all super soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Take care.
you.